Will, my
What's up,
man.
Matt?
Dude, this is so fun. I'm so glad to do this with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I don't know that there's been this much collective Ableton knowledge in one live stream, and
I know.
maybe
We
ever potentially.
we may break the internet with this video on Ableton Live in worship.
It's very hopefully Al Gore kicked up a few extra servers this morning for us to keep the internet going. We'll see. We'll see what he did.
I for sure don't know anybody else who knows Ableton Live better than you. I think in general, but I think also specifically in the worship space. That's the area that you and I have both been in for a long time.
Yeah.
And if I definitely had a question about Ableton Live in the worship space, I would be coming to you. And I am just really excited to talk to you about this because we've both been doing this for a long time. And that's actually my first question for you is tell me about your first introduction to Ableton Live and why it grabbed your attention.
That's a really good question. I think before I get to live, I have to always I started with Fruity Loops, and I don't know, I guess now it's FL Studio. They've rebranded, which is wise on their part. But that was like my first introduction to electronic music or like producing sounds that are not typically like instrument created sounds. It's not like recording a guitar or something. So I got started with that. And then live, I kind of made the transition to live for so many of us from this era was the Illuminate Crowder CD, which had Reason, and it had the Reason files from Illuminate from that record.
I remember that.
And then, and I just spent so much time kind of researching what these folks are doing, how they're using things. And then I think my first copy of Live, if I remember correctly, came with my PreSonus FirePod interface. If anyone remembers that guy, I'm actually going to see if I can find an image of this, but that was the first interface I got. And it had Ableton Live on it. And honestly, for me, my first start with Ableton was recording. Like I was a songwriter. At that time I was in middle school or high school, I think maybe high school. So I was recording, writing songs. And then I started to realize it's actually like an instrument to be used live on stage, which is really cool. So, for me, my first intro was more from a songwriter type perspective than a using it live on stage perspective, which is obviously everything I do now.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that it was from a recording songwriting perspective. So,
well, that was my initial take of it, and I think the thing that attracted me to Ableton, obviously, this as a CT, but originally created for live performance of like pre-recorded content and flexibility, but kind of what came out of that, because of the way Ableton, the company, created Live, is it was a software that was really lightweight. It was a software that's like, if you need an audio track, you hit Command T and you have an audio track. You don't get a menu that says, would you like stereo or return or this or that? And so for me, I was drawn not to Pro Tools for recording. I was drawn to Ableton because of its simplicity. And so, that was my main introduction. But I think you kind of continue to see that now, like, because there's always been an emphasis on creativity in the artist as opposed to an engineer. Like things are faster in Ableton and they're just a little more streamlined than like Pro Tools or Logic or something like that.
Ableton Live helps keep creatives in the moment. You're not, like you said, they're not digging in through menus. They want to keep you moving, like no nonsense, like keep you moving, keep you in the moment. And I think that's what I loved about Ableton Live too. My first experience seeing it was I walked into an auditorium and I saw a guy with a computer on stage down by his feet. And he started just a drum beat that was just, and that drum beat played the entire song. It never changed. It never stopped until I think he probably stepped on his space bar with his foot. Yeah. But, and I remember thinking that's so cool that somehow he's using, a computer and music software along with leading worship. Cause I was always just like acoustic guitar player with a band. I don't even think I ever even played to a click at that point. Oh, wow. So when I saw it, I loved it because I loved leading worship, but I loved technology. And it was so cool that you could do both together. And so I fell in love. What about you? Where did you kind of see like this could actually be used inside of worship?
Yeah, I mean, I think two moments for me, similar to you. I was never like super into EDM or electronic music. Since then, I've gotten more into it. But for me, it was just the concept of like, these are sounds that were not created by a analog instrument, and sometimes it is an analog synthesizer, so like I don't want people to get caught on that, but like the beeps and boops, the blips and beeps, whatever you want to call them, like I was really interested in that, and in integrating that into a worship context. And again, for me, it goes back to Crowder Band and BWAC and those guys, because for me, that was the first that was the era of me starting to lead worship. I was in high school. I was the guy out front with an acoustic guitar, but I was super interested in, like, they just had a different sound to me. And looking back, sometimes, you know, even still now, a lot of when you listen to their stuff, it sounds like poppy and produced like today does. But if you can get in a time machine and go back and realize, yes, it sounded like that in the studio, but what was unique with Crowder Band is they sounded that way live. Like if you sat center of the room, you would hear panning of these really cool effects that BWAC, you know, created in Ableton, or whatever, and then got them in Ableton. So for me, first it was this idea of like, oh, I can have these extra sounds, which was really cool. The next piece that I was like super hooked was at Liberty University. I was in the campus praise band there, and it was our second year. And I've always been overconfident in my abilities, and so I kind of sold our band leader David. I said, "Hey, our percussionist who was there the first year is gone, so let's like use loops, like you were talking about, the kind of textury, like loopy things, one shot stuff. Let's use that to replace our percussionist." And so I still remember the rehearsal. We were doing Everything Glorious, ironically enough, a Crowder Band song. And we got to the chorus, and I just triggered the tambourine to come in the chorus. And just the vibe that kind of brought to the music of having our drummer kind of play a little wider, a little more open, and having this tambourine keeping time, and being a little more straight and a little more like keeping time, if that makes sense to people. I remember that moment. So, cause we all just like looked around the room like, wow, this is so cool. And so that was really, really fun. So for me, that would have been sophomore year of college, 2005, that I was like hooked. Like I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And then it's 4 years of playing literally every single day in front of 10,000 plus people, leading worship with Ableton Live, making major mistakes that like lets you just kind of learn how to do it, you know. And it was super, super fun though.
That's so interesting, because for me, it's the same thing as far as David Crowder. That was so influential. That album, Illuminate, and then the A Collision, I think it was called. I actually want to go back and listen to those albums now, because I bet it would just be cool to listen to it. But they had so many cool electronic elements, and you could put the CD in your computer and get all the Reason files, and it changed everything. It was like, and I love that the elements that they were using in the tracks were just very definitely stuff you weren't doing live, unless you were someone like BWAC. But like most people were not actually playing those elements live, or had someone on stage to play all those beeps and bloops, and it was just so unique. And so as an Ableton Live certified trainer, and we both are, like, we both have seen this space change a lot, specifically in the worship space. Like, it's blown up in the past. I mean, we've been using it for a couple decades almost, but in the past, like, decade even, it's like blown up the number of people that are using it in churches. And I'd be curious just to hear like what your perspective and experience of that has been. And before you answer, I was just going to kind of give kind of what I was thinking is that, you know, watching worship leaders embrace the software has been really cool for me. I remember, gosh, it was probably 10 years ago. I would do a lot of Ableton Live personal trainings, like one-on-one. And there was a time when I first offered those, like one-on-one trainings with worship leaders, I was doing like 30 a week, like tons, constantly. There were so many worship leaders just like eating it up and wanting to do it now. And it honestly kind of started to drift off. And I think it was almost because all of a sudden there was just this flood of new experts, and there's tons of YouTube videos now that cover just about everything in Ableton Live. And it's just been cool to watch, like, there being what seemed to be a handful of worship leaders using it to now thousands all over the world. And they're great at it. And a lot of it's from, you know, videos that you've put out. Give me your perspective on it. Like, because we were both doing the same thing for a long time. What was your perspective of watching this space grow?
I think the biggest thing to me And this is not just the worship space, because that's one nice thing from studio to stage is I have a lot of students that are also just mainstream artists and mainstream playback techs, but I see this across the board is just this democratization of technology, availability of technology, availability of training and resources that has literally allowed like everyone to compete at the same level, in the sense of I mean, this is a bigger conversation for another day. Like I run a business out of the master closet of my house. Like, and that's nuts to me, you know? And so that's one thing. But from a technology on stage perspective, it used to be, like you said, like it was a protected skill set. And sometimes in a non-worship environment, you still get that some, like you still get you know, there's not a proliferation of like mainstream artist stems and multi-tracks, because those kind of hold the secrets, right? Like you there's no loopcommunity.com slash Beyonce where you get like Beyonce stems or something. So we still don't have that. So there's still a bit of like the closed fist of like, this is a secret we don't want to let out. But what's wild to me is with technology becoming more inexpensive, with resources becoming, you know, whether on YouTube or content you put out or from studio to stage or whatever it is, more people are learning how to do it. And there's literally cover bands, and there's bands of 3 people that can walk into a club anywhere in the world. There's worship leaders that walk into a school auditorium that's a mobile church setup that have the same level of technology that, I mean, even 5 years ago, artists that are out on the road like would pay thousands and thousands and have, this is not an exaggeration, literally have like tractor trailer trucks full of equipment and specialized people to run tracks and to do this and do that. And there's literally worship leaders that on Sunday mornings with iPads or iPhones or MacBook Pros or, you know, bless their hearts, Windows PCs, like running tracks and controlling lights and controlling lyrics and doing all this crazy stuff that, again, used to be that kind of like, this is protected, safe knowledge that we have to guard with our lives because it's our livelihood. So to me, that's what's super fun is literally seeing more access to people, like seeing people that are smaller bands, people that are smaller worship leaders have access to the same tools, the same resources that the big guys, quote unquote, like have access to, and it costs so much less. Like that's what's crazy. It's nuts. It's
Do you remember the old track rigs we would put together with like the huge racks and like tons of different equipment? Like it would cost like thousands of dollars to put together a good playback rig.
Yeah, and shout out to you guys for track rig and Looptimus and like all the hardware tools that you've created. But I've been doing since 2022, I've been doing these like gear rundowns every Saturday, and I literally are amazed. There's been a couple of videos that are like the best whatever under $100, and there's literally probably 15 that I didn't include in that list. Like it's just crazy how inexpensive it is, and not inexpensive in the way that like you're going to get it and be disappointed, but you're going to get it and be like, I can't believe this was only X amount of dollars, you know? And like you said, I mean, I remember the first track rig I built in Florida, South Florida. It was a redundant rig. So we had the radial SW8. I had 2 Motu interfaces, which thank God I've gotten away from ultralights, but 2 interfaces. It was like a whole rig that was probably $5,000 now. And that entire rig exists in a Play Audio 12 for $500, like 2 audio interfaces together.
Isn't that wild?
It's just it's crazy to me. Like it's absolutely crazy to me. So it's really fun to see. Like, I mean, I'm only 36 years old, but in a lot of ways I feel like a really old man because both of us have been around for a while and seen kind of this progression happen. But it's exciting, man. It's so exciting.
What version of Ableton Live was out when you started using it?
I can never remember. I want to say 5 maybe. Like I know some folks were there from the beginning. I wasn't one of those folks, but I want to say it was either Ableton 4 or Ableton 5. I do remember the point where, and maybe this was from 8 to 9, or maybe it was earlier. I do remember the point where they completely shifted the like warping engine and everyone had to relearn how to warp because they improved it. And I remember first learning warping on the old system and then learning the new one, but I want to say it was 5.
Yep. I think I was at 2 or 3, somewhere between there.
Okay.
But I totally remember the free discs you'd get like with your NEM Audio keyboard or any sort of interface. And it was awesome. But I do agree that it's so cool how it's because it's become so much cheaper, like all the gear to actually do this, it's become so much more accessible to so many more churches, not just mega churches with huge budgets, but now small churches. And it's also really cool how worship leaders have become like self-experts in it. And then they're teaching other worship leaders, you know, in their community or their worship leader friends, like, or they're doing videos. Like, it is spreading like wildfire. And it's just so cool to see that.
Yeah.
It's almost like as like fathers or something of like Ableton and worship. It's just good to see, like, you know, your kids like flourish and like it's spread and the gospel, you know?
Yeah. I just, if you don't, I just want to share something really quick. There's a little phrase, a kind of a catchphrase we've stumbled on it from studio to stage as I kind of looked at, and I have a podcast episode somewhere. You can search YouTube and find it where I dive into this, but we kind of came up with this phrase, humbly confident, humbly curious. And for me, it was looking back over the past 20 some odd years or whatever of like using tracks and training people and all that stuff, where I looked at like my own personal journey. And then I looked at people that subscribed and became students of From Studio to Stage and have been successful versus folks that like subscribed and dropped off really quickly. And it came down to humbly confident, humbly curious. And so, as you're saying that, I think that's one thing I really want to try to encourage worship leaders listening to this, watching this, is there's some people that they use Prime and they love it, and that's the only thing they're ever going to use, and that's great. There's some people that use Ableton and they think there's no way I could ever use Playbacker Prime. And there's some folks that use Playbacker Prime, they go, there's no way I would ever use Ableton. I just always want to encourage people, be humbly confident, like in what you've got. Like, you got to know your rig, you got to know your stuff. Don't go on stage and try something out for the first time at the 9 a.m. service and then hope it works and try it for the 11. Like, you got to have it together. You got to have your crap together. But you got to be humbly curious. And that's that second piece of, I spent years like very like this, like I know the way to do it. This is my way. No one knows it better than me. There's no other way that exists in the world. And once I kind of saw other people do it using Ableton in different ways, or saw, you know, features that Prime added, that I was like, wow, this is really cool. So people like whoever's watching this, I just want to encourage you, know your stuff really, really well. It's an instrument. That's what I always teach. Ableton Live is an instrument. And people say, well, you know, Ableton Live isn't very volunteer friendly. I'm like, well, neither is guitar. Like it took me 3 months for my fingers not to bleed. Like, what's less volunteer friendly than an acoustic guitar? It's an instrument. So you got to devote time to it, but just humbly confident, humbly curious. Hopefully that hits somebody today and just kind of encourages them to like, keep searching out there, keep seeking, because again, there's so many resources and there's so much training and content available to figure out how to do whatever you want to do, which is awesome.
Let's talk about what tracks used to be when you and I first started using tracks versus what they have kind of become. And what I mean by that is, you know, you kind of rewind back to when you and I first started using tracks, and they were very much electronic elements. You know, we're talking about the David Crowder band era. It was very electronic elements, you know, beeps, bloops, glitches, computer sounds. And then over time, it eventually became more of real live instrument tracks or stems, whatever you want to call them. And I'm not sure how you would actually kind of categorize those two things, because there was really a shift. When you and I first started using them, no one was using like real life instrument stems. It was all these electronic elements. And so I'd be curious, what has been your perspective on that journey? And have there been any positives or negatives from that transition?
Yeah, that's really good. So I think you're right. My kind of action was the more kind of otherworldly type stuff. And I think the, you know, it's the Crowder band stuff. It's the beeps and the boops and stuff. It's, I was actually looking this up because I couldn't remember the name of the software to save my life, but Spectrasonics Stylus RMX, if you guys have heard of that or used that, that was kind of the defining thing for, it's been a long time. Since I had to actually go to their site because it's not like easy to find. It's not mentioned on the front page here, but Stylus was like their kind of drum programming thing. And that was really huge in the, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s kind of just era of music production, because it was so simple. So Spectrasonics made it really, really simple to do drum programming stuff. And so, a lot of the sounds you heard were these kind of other textures. It was like drum beats that have been filtered, that have been affected, that a drummer would play with, kind of fill out the sound kind of thing. I think that was really, really fun. There was also an era of time, I listened to I can't remember what podcast it was, but you did a podcast fairly recently where you were kind of talking about the same thing I'm about to mention. So I'm not copying you, but I think we had a similar experience with this.
Yeah.
And I actually, this is great because I found it. So I, at one point, had this guy, which I still have. This is the first MIDI controller I ever had.
Oh yeah.
This is the Behringer FCB 1010, right?
Oh yeah.
It weighs probably the weight of like 5 Luptami. I don't know if that's the proper plural pronunciation, but it's quite heavy. And so I had that guy, and what I had done is I had assigned, this is actually really cool. I still need to do a video on this. I had assigned a different, at the time I had a collection of loops called what are they called? Elements. So electronic elements, essential elements, synthetic elements, and I would create those. And I would basically program a pedal to be a different sound. And so we'd get into a song, I'd trigger a scene, which would be our tempo. And then I would go, oh, I want this washi loop to come in. I want this tambourine to come in. And I would trigger that when we wanted it to happen. And that was really, really fun. It was very interactive. I had to interact a lot with it. We would tap tempo stuff out, and then I would bring a loop in, having the expression pedal, I'd fade loop in. It was really cool. It was really fun. And I remember doing that with a guy I used to travel with, worship leader, and we had a lot of fun doing that. But then, like you said, I don't know, maybe around, honestly, it was the kind of growth of loop community, the growth of multi-tracks that I think that fueled this. And you have such a big part that you played in this, is shifting from that to stems, multi-tracks, whatever you want to call it, where it's basically the master recording or a re-recording of an artist song. And as opposed to just getting what we would consider, you and I back in the day, the loops, right? Instead of just that, it's like, here's pedal steel, here's the keyboard part, here's the drum part, here's the keys part. And that shift, I think, was really good in the sense of it helped church musicians replicate what they heard on the radio, what they heard like on the original record, more easily. It allowed smaller worship context, smaller bands that didn't have 7 guitar players to play the latest Hillsong song, take those different parts and combine them together to create one kind of great sound, which I think is really good. You did mention though, like, is there any cons to that? I think if I had to think of one con to the shift to more multi-tracks, is for worship leaders that don't think of that as an instrument, because it's harder to think of Ableton or Prime as an instrument now, because it has a lot of instruments coming out of, and you think of it as this other thing. It's not an instrument, but it is. In the same way you wouldn't ask a guitar player to come show up on stage, and you already have another guitar player, you wouldn't let them just play willy-nilly whatever they want to. You would say, you're going to play this, you're going to play that. And I think one of the downsides to stems, multi-tracks, and worship leaders using a lot of that is people that don't view it as an instrument, a lot of times will just download a track from Loop Community, press play in Prime, and just go. And what they don't realize is there's 7 guitar parts, and they could take probably 3 of those out. They could take this one out, and they could use that stuff to supplement the band they have on stage. And I think the absolute worst thing we could do as worship leaders and music directors is ever say, hey, Johnny, I don't want you to play the lead line here. It's in the tracks. And you're like, what? And I've seen churches that around Christmas time, everyone's got to do Miraculum. And so they just have their guitar player, like, finger tapping like Eddie Van Halen, but it's all just Lincoln Brewster's guitar part, it's in the track. So I think that's where we have to be careful. And that's where I view this as an instrument. And as a music director, you have to be a pastor to your people and pastor them through the music side of it. But I think it's great that we have it. But you just got to be aware, what is it? With great power comes great responsibility. And so it's like, just be responsible with all those guitar parts you have, and don't leave them all in there. Just because they're there, don't leave them all in there. And just because there's a 18-bar intro, it doesn't mean you have to do that. Cut that down, make it work for your context.
I love the idea of seeing your computer or your iPad as an instrument to play. And that's actually a part of tracks that I personally really miss as a worship leader. Because right now when I lead, it is kind of just pressing play and playing along with the track. But when I first started using tracks, I was using like a foot controller, something like this. It wasn't this, but it was something very similar to this. And Ableton Live. And I was using little beat elements. Some actually that came from, I'm old enough to remember your website, loopsandworship.com, where you had all those, beat packs. And I stacked those clips, inside of Ableton Live, and I would use this to kind of control all those different scenes and layers. And it really felt like I was playing not just my guitar, but I was playing Ableton Live. And I really missed that because there was something special about that. Do you still see people doing that at all?
I don't see a lot of that particular thing. I will say I did a training, and I forgot his name. I did a training about a month ago with a guy who's an MD at a church, and it was more of a like gospel context kind of thing. And he joined the call, and he had a set and session view, really similar to what we're talking about, to where like his first scene in the song was just click, then a second scene was like a loop, and then the third scene was like two loops kind of combined together. And when he first opened the set, I was like, oh, this is going to be a tough call, because I'm going to say, I would actually suggest you probably move over to arrangement view, do this, do that. But as we started talking about the context of what he's doing, I'm like, you're doing the exact right thing, because they were basically treating Ableton as an instrument, but really just as like percussion is all they were doing. They didn't have stems. They didn't have like guitar parts in it. It was just percussion elements. And so that was probably a month and a half ago. And I apologize if you're watching this. I can't remember your name off the top of my head, but we had a great time on the call. I was showing him the whole select a scene and automatically select the next scene and just press play and go, which was fun. And so I think there's still a little bit of that. I do think there's a shift towards people being a little more interactive with whether it's Prime or Ableton, in the sense of like it following them. And again, like you said, Prime makes it so freaking easy to like have spontaneity and to be flexible that sometimes you forget it's still an instrument. But I'm starting to see more music directors like make decisions like, we're going to cut this intro, we're going to repeat here, we're going to do that. And it's still really easy to do, but there does have to still be a musical element of like, what makes a good arrangement a good arrangement? What makes a good transition a good transition? You got to know what that is in order to create it, as opposed to just press transition button. And that's going to get you really close. But I dog a lot of times on worship leaders for like relying on drone pads, and a bad transition with a drone pad is still a bad transition with the drone pad. It's not a great transition. So like focus on that, know your music and pass to your people, even through the music elements, I think is super important.
What is the most innovative thing you've seen people doing in a non-church setting? And I'm going to ask you in a second about a church setting, but in a non-church setting, what's the most innovative thing you've seen people doing with Ableton Live that you're like, that's pretty cool?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this since you sent me the question, because I was like, there's so many different scenarios. And I think in both scenarios, this will be kind of similar. But to me, the thing I'm most interested in, and kind of the most unique thing I've seen, is people using Ableton as the kind of master control, is what I've called it, for creating a connected stage or a network stage. And this idea of using Ableton Live to control guitar presets, keys presets, control video to send LTC SMPTE to Resolume or whatever they're using, and using Ableton kind of as central control. And that's been happening. I mean, it's not like it's new. That's been happening for quite a while. But one of the funnest kind of environments I walked into, gosh, this is probably 2 or 3 years ago now. It was right when I had launched from studio to stage, and I got a call from the Air Force, which is really unique and interesting. And they said, hey, we have an Air Force band out in Omaha. We want you to come out and like spend some time with them. And so I went to Offutt Air Force Base. It was like this surreal experience, because they had the Doomsday plane like on the runway, like about to take off. It was snowing, so they closed the base down. They said only essential personnel, and the band was like, the band has never been essential personnel for the United States military, but they were that day. So I'm like rolling on to Offutt, and they had this little rehearsal room, and Jarrett, the guy who had programmed this for them, had basically watched these YouTube videos I did, and was using Ableton Live as master control, and using TouchOSC to control Ableton Live. And Ableton controlled their guitar program changes on their pedals. They had I think a line 6 Helix for bass that it was controlling charts on their iPads, lights, videos, basically everything. And he had done that with a budget of essentially nothing. I don't think at the time they had a redundant rig, but like he just watched YouTube videos that I had done, picked it all up, and like kind of created that from scratch. And that was a cool thing for me to see and sit back and kind of watch them do that and go like, again, that democratization of technology, that whole idea of taking what used to be super expensive and making it available to everyone.
Yeah.
That was really, really cool and fun for me to see.
Isn't it cool to watch how people maybe took like one video you did on something and then they take the idea and run with it and even expand upon it and like go even more geeky and nerdy. You're like, wow, like that's not at all what what I was doing with that video, but you like totally ran with it, made it your own. I think that's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal of like, I mean, you know, this is something who's taught thousands and thousands of people as well too, but like as a teacher, as an instructor, that's like your hope. And I have no real interest in like teaching people, here's how to do something and that's it. I mean, that's what I do. I teach people step-by-step process, but my hope is to really teach you why. And I think that's a big thing that you don't get from YouTube. YouTube is all about how do I blah, 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 you land on a video, great.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in is the why. Like, why does this work? And if you understand why this works, then you can then apply that in other places. And I've had multiple times where I've released something and I've had a student or just a random person on YouTube. It's very rarely a random person that comments on YouTube, but sometimes it is, where they say, hey, you could do it this way. Or have you ever thought about that? And I've used Ableton Live for a very, very long time. So it's very rare that someone says something that kind of catches me like, oh yeah, you're right. But probably once a year that happens. And I go, man, that's way better than the way I thought. Like that's a way simpler approach. And I just love that. Like that's so fun to have those moments. And like you said, see people using content you've created and taught for years and years. It's so super cool.
So what about in a church setting? You know, you've worked with a lot of churches, seen a lot of worship leaders use this. What's the most innovative thing you've seen a church do?
Yeah, I think the first person that came to mind for me is my buddy Doug Laws, and Doug is a From Studio Stage subscriber. Doug has been a good friend for a very long time. He was like the very first day I announced From Studio Stage, he subscribed and has been subscribed ever since. Just a great dude, not just because of that. That sounds like, you know what I mean. He's just a great dude.
I know.
But what's so cool about Doug is at a church in the Keys, Florida Keys, you know, and that's an area where there's a lot of people in and out. Like it's hard to get people consistent. We had the same issue in Fort Lauderdale when I was there for 5 years of like, that's a town people vacation in. It's a town people come for a couple months during the winter and then leave and go back to Canada or wherever up north. So it's hard to have consistent people. So what Doug has done, again, similar to what I mentioned with Ed Offit and with the Air Force Band, he's using Ableton Live, but he's using it to literally do everything. It starts their live stream. It switches cameras in OBS. It switches presets on their PTZ cameras. It changes key in Wavestune Live. I believe it mixes their broadcast mix, if I remember correctly. And they do a unique thing where they basically record their rehearsal and then that kind of goes into Ableton. And they're kind of like mix it, but then play back that session. He's triggering lyrics, he's triggering video, all sorts of things. And as a worship leader, you may be listening to that and going, well, he's missing out on an opportunity to get volunteers involved. Well, he's got tons of volunteers involved, but he did that as a need. Like he needed that content to happen. It's just him. And I actually did a podcast recording with him a couple years ago where Doug basically said, I did this so that I can be a better pastor to my people. So as opposed to me spending, you know, the week doing all this technology stuff, I can do it once. I never have to do it again. It's a core principle of what I teach is do it once, never have to do it again. And then he just spends time pastoring his people, which is really cool. So Doug, I think from in the church context, it's what Doug is doing. And I always brag on Doug because when he did the PTZ camera thing, the folks that make that PTZ optics actually got an email from Deadmau5, the producer. And Deadmau5 was about to go on tour. And he's like, I saw that video with that church guy. Can y'all help me do that with my rig? And so I always tell Doug, we call him Doug Mouse, but I always tell Doug that he like inspired Deadmau5 to do his tour in a cool, unique way. So
that is really cool.
Very, very cool. Yeah, Doug's a good dude. And if you Google Doug Laws, Lawes, you'll find the PTZ Optics video where they kind of do a focus on his church. And he's changed some things and tweaked things. Last year, I saw him at an Experience conference, and he was kind of telling me some of the stuff he's changed. But all in all, it's like Ableton at the center of it and controlling all sorts of crazy things, which is really, really cool.
Where do you see tracks in worship going over the next decade? More tracks, less tracks, any new technology innovation you see on the pipeline?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I honestly, I kind of go back and forth because everything is cyclical. You know, everything is, we go through periods of we want like young and free, and then we're like, no, we want quote unquote authentic worship, which apparently means just a guy with an acoustic guitar. So then we go to that, and then we're like, no, we want to do things with excellence. So then we go back, and then we go back and forth. We can't make our minds up in the church. So I think there is kind of that cyclical thing of going from highly produced music to music that's a little less produced, but still. I mean, what's funny, I have friends in a band that's a more kind of bluegrassy, like folky style thing. And I remember getting, not in an argument, but in a conversation with someone, and their argument against using tracks, they referenced this band, Rin Collective. Everybody knows Rin Collective if you're a worship leader. And they're like, we want to be more like Rin Collective. And I'm like, I can literally text Steve right now, and Steve can send you his Ableton set with all the tracks that they use live.
Right.
Like, even though it's a little more quote unquote authentic or stripped down, they're still running tracks live. That's right. That's right. So I think we'll probably see a trend towards less of the electronic stuff. I think we're kind of already seeing that. You see that with like Maverick City music and stuff, and it's more just like expressive stuff, airy kind of things. I think we'll see that. I'm really interested to see though in the worship resource space. It's almost to a point now where it's so saturated that the downside to that sometimes is it doesn't make worship leaders like really be in do the work of planning their set. And sometimes I think, and I want to be very careful here, because I mean, I worked for a worship resource company for 5 years and had Loops and Worship before that. And I'm talking to the king of worship resources. Like, I'm not saying what you've done is bad. I'm not saying what Loop Community has done is bad, but I have seen some worship leaders that are so reliant on, oh, I can't wait for the master tracks to come out for the new Hillsong album to get them on Loop Community, so that we can do that song, that they're not going, should I even do that song? Like, is that a song we should do? You know, like, I do think I love seeing local churches creating their own music and then releasing resources for that people are finding and using. And I think we're gonna continue to see that, which is really great. But yeah, I think there'll be ebbs and flows as to the type of sounds we use. I think we're going to probably still keep using stems and multi-tracks, which is great. But I do just hope sometimes people just pause and go like, we're surrounded by so many incredible resources and tools. Should I do this though? Just because I can, should I? You know, and I even say I go to worship conferences and I start my classes, which is not a great way to sell people on a website that teaches people how to do this. But I tell them like, you should not use tracks. You should not run click. Like, I want to take the pressure off of you. Even people watching this now, like, don't shut the stream down on me, Matt. But like, if you go to a worship conference and you hear all these teachers teach about all the things you should do, and you feel overwhelmed and you feel stressed and you say, I have no budget, whatever, then just don't do it. Like, I've yet to find in some book of the Bible, second epistles, that says like, thou shalt use tracks. It's like, if you don't want to do it, if you don't have the resources, the tools to do it, don't do it. You know, I literally remember in college at Liberty, I had no money, as all college students do. And I had an index card written down where gear that I really wanted to purchase: Pro Tools, which thank God didn't answer that prayer, but Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, M Audio. Like, I had all this gear that I wanted, and I would just pray and ask God, like, provide money and means and resources to get that, you know, and like, do that. If that's what you're looking for and you need, do that. But you don't have to use click tracks and that sort of thing. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. But you know, pray about it, and again, be a pastor to your people first, and not like a worship technology expert who happens to some days pastor his people or her people. Like, you know, serve your people really well. Whatever serves them, do that.
I 100% agree with you. It's people over the music. A lot of times we can get so bogged down with the technology. And you're right, just like the new Hillsong album, and just doing every song on the album instead of actually thinking about, is this going to serve my church well? Is it going to serve what we're going through? What, you know, is it even a good song for our congregation? So I totally agree with you on that. As far as technology, I have two questions. One, do you think we're ever going to see tracks end up kind of entering this like AI sense where maybe the tracks follow you as a worship leader, you know, or the click follows you? with your tempo. Maybe there's like a boundary you can set on the click, and it stays with you within those boundaries, which I know, Ableton has that feature. Have you seen people use that? Where the click is
I've seen people try to use that. I've tried to use that. I mean, who knows with like AI and Web3 and NFTs and all the crap that's coming out, like who knows where we'll be in 10 to 20 years. But I do constantly have this joke I've always wanted to do, and this will kind of spoil it if I announce it. But when I was at Multitracks, I always wanted us to devote way too many resources and too much money to making a mockumentary like April Fool's joke, where we released a chart app called Char Art with like a big AR in the middle, and like someone wearing AR goggles, and they're like see the chart around them and stuff. It's possible someone's probably working on it somewhere, but
it would work if it's a contact lens.
That's true. And who knows what Apple will release, and we'll all buy it anyway and we'll use it. So, but I could see some cool stuff there happening. But the one thing I kind of hope, I've always been really slow to adopt or push back on the whole idea of like the click follows me. I always teach we play with a click, not to a click. So like that's a big distinction to me. I do think we do live in a time to a certain extent where tracks do follow us, and like we can make tracks go wherever, change key, tempo, whatever. That's exciting. But the thing I always push back on is people say, I just want to start playing and I want everything to adapt to me and change to me and me not have to play to a click. And I'm like, well, there's certain songs that are just meant to be played to a click, and they're meant to be played at a certain tempo, and playing them with a wavering tempo doesn't make it more authentic or more worshipful or better. It makes it like worse, in my opinion. But then, yes, there's times and moments of songs where it's like very dramatic and you slow down and you retard, and then it gets really big, and you speed up or slow down. Like, and we could do that now. But I hope we don't get to a time where a worship leader who's led worship for 2 years, who can barely play to a click, turns on a setting in live and just starts playing Phil Wickham songs at like 200 BPM because they're super pumped and don't realize it. And the tracks follow them. I hope we don't get to that
I hope
point.
the tracks don't follow them.
That's right. Yeah, I hope in that case Ableton crashes and it But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I do think the whole AI thing is really interesting in the production world and the like mixing world. And I've got a buddy here in Austin that we talk often about, like, probably in 20 to 30 years there may not be sound engineers because we'll have a perfect algorithm of what it should sound like and it'll do it.
I was just going to ask you, I was thinking this past weekend, I'm helping at this church plant in our town. It's like 100 people there. Nice. There's a sound engineer who's like volunteer. But I was thinking, you know what? Why are there even sound engineers? Like, couldn't we have some sort of mixer that has, we tune the room, first of all, but then once it knows what inputs it's getting, it can like auto mix and make a perfect sounding mix with the instruments it's getting. Yeah,
we're not far off from that. I mean, if you think of like a public address system in a like courtroom or something, I mean, that's what they're doing with Doggett Auto Mix, is they basically have set levels and made sure things don't, talk over each other, and they've rang out the system so it doesn't feed back. But like a smaller situation like that, where you have an acoustic guitar and tracks, it's like, I don't understand why. I'm with you. I think we kind of will know the algorithm, and I get that, like, I don't want to reduce audio engineering to an algorithm because there is an art to it, but there also is the reality that like probably none of us will have jobs and it will all be Wally in like 30 years and we'll be on the spaceship. But I think it's possible. Like, I don't think we're that far off from that.
Yeah. Do you know of anybody who's actually working on that? Like auto mixing for a digital mixer?
So there is the Doggett Auto Mix technology, which currently exists, and Behringer has their kind of rip off of that. But that is more of that's more of just for like public address system and a couple voices, essentially. I have seen, if you go to like CDM, Create Digital Music, Peter Kern's site, I believe Peter's posted some stuff of like auto mix things. And I mean, we're literally in the, not necessarily from the live world, but in the mastering world. Like, there's all the algorithms and the auto mastering stuff that you upload. Plugins now can auto EQ things like live in the studio. So I don't think we're very far off from that. I do have a friend though that's working on a project that it's not necessarily auto mixing stuff, but the stuff they're doing literally is currently impossible to do. Like physics doesn't allow it to happen. And they're like hired scientists from NASA to help them try to do the math to figure out how to make this happen. And I guess it's a project that's supposed to launch in like 2 years or something. But anyway, just the stuff that you can get kind of on the peripheral of that is really wild. So again, I think in 10 years, who knows where we're going to be, particularly once Apple releases whatever AR, VR thing they're working on. That again, we'll all buy and we'll say it's too expensive and complain about, but everyone will buy it and use it. And
we may not even be at church. We'll just be wearing glasses and just sitting in your living room and listening to spatial audio, you know, of the worship set.
Well, it's funny you say that. We just got back from vacation like 2 days ago, and we were in Florida for probably 10 days. And we went to our church in Fort Lauderdale, where we were there for 5 years. And talking to my buddy Rich there, he's like, yeah, we've got a VR campus now. And they hired a pastor, and it's a guy and his wife are basically the pastors of this like VR church that they do. And on one hand you look at it and you go like, okay, blah, blah, blah. But then on the other hand, it's like there are people that were in that world that then got saved and were believers and want to then use that as a tool to minister to people and reach people. And I think the same people are saying the same thing when there were televangelists and people on TV trying to reach people and going, yeah, okay, we're being like the world. So it's very possible. It's very, very possible that 10 years from now, it'll just be put my goggles on and choose, you know, which big mega church that I want to attend that day. So, and there's good and bad to that. Obviously, this is not the place for that discussion. But
it'd be wild if you could walk up on stage in the middle of the band and like with spatial audio, like now the drums are behind you, and you could walk over by the guitar player and hear the guitar more. That'd be wild.
Well, we have Clang now, so that's essentially spatial audio, you know, and it's like, if you got a Digico and you've got Clang, granted that's on stage, but again, it's like the resources are there. Like as you kind of talk about it, you're like, this is a little creepy. Like we're closer to this. We're closer to the robot apocalypse than I think we think. Yeah, it could happen.
Totally. All right. So we only have a few more minutes left, but I have a couple more questions I want to get through. What type of church should use Ableton Live versus an app like Prime or Playback?
Yeah. I'll say this as a generic thing. And I say this even if I'm not on an interview with a person who creates an app that plays back multi-track content. Yeah. If you're a worship leader and you're getting started with tracks, Playbacker Prime is the way. Like, do not start on Ableton. If you're starting with tracks, start with Playbacker Prime. I think the shift to using Ableton is really for people that, again, want to dive deeper into the content, want to be a little more intentional about. An example I use that I think is, and I always say this, I've done a couple of videos where I've said, you know, if Loop Community ever adds this or Multitracks adds this to Playbacker Prime, like it's going to be the downfall. Is there's a certain extent to where there are certain things that Playback and Prime should not ever do, and if they add, then they've missed the point. You know, like like the beauty of Prime is simplicity. And I say, and we were working on this at Multitracks for years before I left, but they implemented it after I left, but I was a part of those discussions. But even the whole, and I know Prime does this too, but even the whole apps controlling lyrics and lights and stuff, I feel like we're right on the edge there. Like I feel like I understand why you have to do it, and the apps can make it way simpler to do, but we're right on the edge of, I think, maybe a little too much. And so an example I always give, let me give you a practical example, or I will talk forever. When it comes to Ableton, being very intentional with transitions and like bringing the song exactly where you want it and getting a full timeline view of where you want things, and then saying, okay, in this transition, I actually want to take the drums out. So like, let's pull the drums out here and let's pull this out. I'm going to lose fingers in a second, but like, let's remove clips to get our transition just right. And then even in the middle of a song to say, we've got 7 electric parts. Well, I want to mute 3 of them, but I actually want the bridge part of this one part, you know, I want to bring that up. Little things like that currently can only be done in Ableton, I think should stay that way. And there's worship leaders though that will never want to do that, and that's fine, and they should stay in Prime or Playback, and that's great. But I think for those that want to go a little further, move a little further, want to use keys live on stage, hosted in Ableton, want to use Ableton to record and edit their church's podcast, to record songs. Those are things Ableton can do. Ableton is a full DAW. And but again, if you're starting Playbacker Prime, no like conversation for me. If you're starting out 100%, that's where you should start.
Yeah, I agree with that too. We have people who come to us and ask us to add all sorts of features to Prime that would basically make it Ableton. And I tell them, no, go use
Yeah.
Ableton. Because the
Yeah.
whole point of Prime was to just give worship leaders the basic needs for running tracks, like simplicity.
Yep.
Like, not every worship leader needs to get super technical and geeky with it, but some do and have the
Yep.
need and the desire. And in that case, then you should go use Ableton Live because you can do
That's very fair.
anything in it. And I
Yeah.
never want Prime to become like Ableton because they both serve a role and a purpose for different people's needs.
That's
And
right.
just like I would never want Ableton Live to strip away features to make it simpler. You know,
Yeah.
I want
That's right.
Ableton to stay like very advanced, which they will, of
Yeah.
course. But I'm just using that analogy in that, like, we don't want to add features to become like Ableton, and I don't want Ableton to remove features to become like Prime.
That's really good. The analogy I always give is it's kind of like buying a Harley and then getting really mad that your family of 6 like can't ride the Harley to take the kids to school, and you're like,
Yeah,
it's not like you got, it's this minivan and this Harley are 2 different things. Like,
yeah,
don't try to make this be that. It's not that one is better than the other. It's like it's all context and it's all what you're
yeah,
trying to do. So yeah, and I think I have to say too, man, what you guys have done with Prime, the one piece of my job that I miss at Multitracks was the product development side of things.
yeah,
And that's something I still like. I'll text my buddy Tyler and I'm like, man, you remember when we did this? You remember when we did that?
yeah,
That's the one thing I still miss, like the product development side of what you guys have done with Prime, and the integration with all the hardware stuff you guys have. It's unbelievable. And I think where it's continuing to go, it's like, it's just amazing. I can't wait to see what you guys continue to do, but where
yeah.
it is even now is just like, it's mind blowing. So congrats on that. Keep
Thanks,
diving
man.
deep on the product stuff. That's the one piece of my job that I really miss, is that like dreaming of
Yeah.
product stuff and dreaming things up. It was super, super fun.
What was your favorite thing that you worked on when you were there? Like, what's the thing that you look back on? You're like, I'm most proud of this feature. Like, this took like all of my energy, all of my creative like thought. Is there something that you're like, you look back on and you're the most proud of?
Yeah, I think there's one thing I don't know that I'm allowed to say. It
Okay.
exists, but like it was basically the creation of a underlining technology that
Okay.
allows a certain product to do what it does. And that's something that me and my buddy Tyler, I don't know that, and I don't expect Multitracks to ever like roll out the red carpet and bring us back when we're 50 and say congratulations to Will and Tyler Praying for doing this. But
Yeah.
I do look back at that as something that like we drastically changed and shaped the future of Multitracks and their product releases by us literally creating this thing from scratch, which is really fun.
Interesting.
Um, but the thing that I can talk about that I think was the most fun to me was the shift from, and I've seen you do this as well too, and any smart company, it's not like I'm the person that came up with this, but I think I really was, what's the best way? I was very fundamental in shifting Multitracks from being a disparate product company to being an ecosystem.
Mhm.
And I think any company like Loop Community, Multitracks, any resource company that creates software and hardware products, like you've got to see things as an ecosystem, and you've got to
Yeah.
start going, what would happen if Prime could control ProPresenter? What would
Yeah.
happen if this, when you plugged in this MIDI foot controller and it automatically
Mhm.
does that sort of stuff? So I think, and that was something that, everybody has thoughts of doing, but I think before I was at Multitracks, that's not something they were like actively striving to do, or fully understood how to bring together. And so
Yeah.
that was really, really fun. I miss doing that. I miss dreaming about how we can make things simpler for worship leaders, which was really, really fun. But yeah, there were, again, the product development thing. I mean, this, it's like super fun. It's super rewarding. It's awesome I remember you and I were, what's the Sweetwater thing? Gear Fest, I think 2 or
Yep.
3 years ago. And we're just sitting there talking, and probably 3 people came up to us in the middle of us talking to say thank you for what you guys have done. And that's like a
Yep.
super rewarding thing to know. There's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of churches all around the globe that are leading people into the presence of
Yeah.
God, and are using a bit of like training or technology that
Little
you've created.
knowledge.
So I think,
Yeah, that they
yeah,
got from a YouTube video or a one-on-one
yeah,
training, and it spreads too. It's like
that's
it's
right.
with igniting one fire, and then it just kind of spreads, and they start getting their
That's right.
worship leader friends on it. It
That's
is
right.
pretty amazing. Will, you
It's
did a
really,
great
really
job.
cool.
You did a great job with the products over there at Multitracks.
Thank you.
Because even like what you do with Playback, I mean, it's awesome. It's a great app. And that's kind of, I really wanted to know that question of like, what is the one thing that you really were proud of there? Because I think you really did a lot. And that's one of your superpowers is, I think, seeing like new products, innovation, how to make things easier for worship leaders. So I think it's awesome. Well done. So the other thing that you're innovating on, and this is the last question I have for you, is just talk about from studio to stage. So what is from studio to stage? Why did you start it? What's been the biggest challenge for you in building it? And how can people get involved? Just give us the whole spiel on from studio to stage.
Yeah. So, you know, I was at Multitracks doing product development and I loved it. But I realized my passion and the word calling is a little scary sometimes because people can say God's going to do things and justify it. But I do feel like it's kind of this like, what's the one thing God's placed on the planet that you're uniquely gifted and talented to do?
Yeah.
And for me, that's teaching and training and taking complex things and making them simple, which is quite ironic because I come from a long line of overcomplicators and over engineers. But I think that's something I do really well. And so I left Multitracks 3 years ago to start from studio to stage. And from studio to stage is a online Ableton Live certified training center. And kind of the goal is to help people and teach people how to run tracks like a pro with Ableton Live. And so it's an online subscription based platform. And the cool thing about this, and I'm going to share my screen just so you guys can see this if you want to take me full screen. And so from studio to stage, a couple things I'll just walk everybody through. So right now we have over 50 courses, and they're all 24/7 on-demand access. And so what that means is at any time that you want to log in and watch a course, you can log in and watch a course. You can download the From Studio to Stage app to get offline access to content. But what's cool is we have different unique paths. And so, for instance, you can go to the playback path, not to be confused with the app Playback, but just the general concept of using playback. And I'll introduce you to my 3-part framework for using tracks, which is something I came up with probably about 10 years ago, which is just a unique way to approach using tracks in live. And then take you from tracks 101 all the way to 301, show you how to use Setlist and Taz Pro, Taz Lite, if you're interested in doing that. And then basically all the gear that you would use with it. Eye connectivity interfaces from the MIDI 4 Plus, Mio XM, Play Audio 12, Oak Tone, some of the stuff our mutual friend Jeff Kaler's made, some of his devices and plugins. Actually, I need to get a Loop Community one. So I got to get a Looptimus and track rig stuff on the site.
Yeah, we should get that stuff to you.
Yeah, I would love to do that because the goal, part of the goal with From Studio to Stage is help you understand the ecosystem. We used the E word earlier, ecosystem, but it's like it's not just Ableton, it's not just tracks. And so the other thing here that's really nice is the control path. And so the control path will teach you how to use Ableton Live to control almost anything and everything. So two fundamental classes, Ableton Live control types, making the connection, are kind of the like ABCs and how to form paragraphs and sentences. And then from there, we show how to control Resolume, QLab, Vista, PVP, PTZ optics cameras, OBS, Luminaire, ProPresenter 6, ProPresenter 7, just a generic kind of how to control lights, and then Touch OSC. And I add a new course every single month. And so that catalog is growing. The shop has all my templates I've ever created or released, which is great. And so patches, presets are Ableton Live, my basic advanced tracks template, Foundations 3.0, which is a click track, guide cue player, all sorts of stuff is there. And then in addition to that, we've got a community that's exclusive to the site. And then I do a monthly call every single month with students that's just for students. And it's just kind of an AMA style thing where people can ask me any questions and we dive into that. And so what's cool, the site is really, again, the site is just geared to like provide support and provide an exact kind of framework to walk people through, whether you're a complete beginner or whether you're super advanced. And again, it goes back to that humbly confident, humbly curious thing. We have folks that are incredibly advanced. We have folks that are just started. We have folks that are worship leaders at small churches, big churches. We have people that are playback techs out on the road with major artists, in giant stadiums. And so it's a really cool kind of diverse community of people from all different experiences and how they're using live. But it's all focused on being available whenever you want to access it. So again, like I said, 24/7, all access on demand. And what's really cool, I sent a link to Derek earlier that will be in the description of this. And if you guys are chatting, Live. Derek may have already shared this, I don't know, but we'll throw that in there. That's an exclusive kind of link just for folks watching this, where I've got kind of an exclusive offer for anyone that subscribes that has watched this. But you got to head to that link to figure out what that is. And it's kind of a time limited thing. But if you're watching this, click the link in the description or the chat to head over there. And then the other thing I'll mention too is I started in 2022 releasing a YouTube video every single day, which is quite nuts and has kept me quite busy. But I've got a link as well that I shared with Derek that will take you over to the YouTube channel, and you can subscribe there for free. But again, we release a video every single day and have playlists of all the different content. And so whether you're looking for gear stuff, doing sound design, running tracks, whatever it is, we do that. There's 2 podcasts I do, one called Behind the Spacebar, which is about playback. And then on Thursdays, we do Volunteer Friendly, which is a new one that you will not like, and it will frustrate you as a worship leader, because I ask questions like, has excellence become an idol? Oh, let's turn that, pause that. Has excellence become an idol? Is #worship fails beneficial? Planning versus spontaneity? What does it mean to lead worship with technology? And the goal of that podcast is 10 minutes. I don't like present my viewpoint. I just ask a question. And so it's pretty thought provoking. You won't like it. It'll make you quite frustrated, but I think you'll like it because it will make you think. So we got those 2 links, that one kind of exclusive link to, I'll send all my free resources that I have to you guys if you head over there, and then an exclusive offer if you subscribe. And then definitely check out the YouTube channel. Again, every single day I'm releasing content, which is quite a challenge, but is so fun, because that's why I left multi-tracks, is to teach and train. So I might as well teach and train every single day, which is great. So it's a blast.
Wow, man, that's a lot of videos to be releasing all the time. So you record one every day?
So I release one every single day. So I record it in batches. But it's fun. And you did ask, and I know I'm running over time, but you did ask, like, what's the hardest part? I think to me, the most fulfilling and hardest part is it's just me and my wife. It's not a team of people. I'll get people emailing like, hey, from studio to stage team, blah, blah, blah. And it's just me. But what's rewarding about that is we live in a time again where there's this thing called the creator economy, where creators can literally build businesses just based off content and teaching and training. And I love it. So it's been super fun, super rewarding. And it's fun interacting with folks and hearing comments of how it's helping or suggestions on how to do it better. That's fun as well too, to always hear.
Man, thanks for joining. We'll have to do this again. Maybe some other time we'll have to get the other 2 CTs in the worship space all together. We'll do like a big panel and just talk worship Ableton Live. That'd be fun.
That'd be awesome. That'd be super fun.
Good to see you again, man. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, everybody.